Okay, welcome. We're going to do question 3 from 2007 February. It's straight criminal law question. And then again, if you have not read this fact pattern, please do so before you listen to this so that you can get the most out of it. It's the most beneficial thing to do. Okay, let's go to the cause of the question. And as one of the things you'll notice with criminal law, criminal procedure, and a few other subjects for that matter, is the examiners will often tell you the issues, the precise issues they want you to discuss. And this essay follows suit. Number 1. Can the jury properly find Dan guilty of first-degree murder? Don't forget, in a criminal case, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. So can they properly find Dan guilty of first-degree murder? No, first-degree murder. Students often confuse first-degree murder with what malice aforethought is, and I'll explain that in this essay so you can really get the difference between the degrees. Number 2. Can the jury properly find Dan guilty of second-degree murder? Second degree. Okay. Number 3, voluntary manslaughter. And number 4, insanity. Okay. Let's take it from the top. Clearly, this essay is only about murder and insanity. That's it. All right, Dan has been in and out of mental institutions most of his life. That fact's going to go there, in and out. Again, read every sentence carefully and thoroughly. And read it and the examiners don't use descriptive language without a purpose. Keep that in perspective. Keep that in mind when you're going through this. And also note that not every single sentence and every single word is going to be a case cracker. Sometimes the examiners either have to finish off the story or they have to build the background of the story. And oftentimes students will be like, I don't know what that sentence means, and they'll try to force it into something that it's not. Sometimes, again, it's just the story or it's just them putting it together. So here, mental institutions in his life, we know it's going to go to some part of insanity. While working in a grocery store, stocking shelves, he's acting like a normal person. Again, this is more of the background facts, so it can kind of set the stage of what's going to happen and where it's going to happen. He got into an argument with a customer who complained that Dan was blocking the aisle. Notice that D for Dan stands for defendant, V for Vic stands for victim, and community property of Wanda will be the wife, Harry will be the husband, and Tom will be the testator, C will be the co-conspirator, O will be the officer. Keep that in perspective. The examiners are not at all trying to trick you. There are no red herrings or hide the ball routines on the bar exam. In fact, it's actually very straightforward, so much so that people make it harder than it is. So don't make this exam any harder than it is. It's a state licensing exam testing minimum legal competence. You've probably heard me say that before. Okay. He got in an argument with the customer that complained that Dan was blocking the aisle. All right, whatever. When Dan swore at Vic and threatened to kick him out of the store, Vic told Dan he was crazy and should be locked up. Okay. How's a normal person going to react to that? Shove off, screw you, get out of here. And depending on if you're at a bar drinking, you're probably going to get into a little bit of a fight. Confrontations usually, alcohol leads to that. But here, this is a store, we got an employee, odds are nothing's going to happen. It continues on. Dan exploded in anger. Now, everyone's going to catch that, or most people are going to, almost nobody's not going to catch it, let's put it like that. With this essay, because they give you the issues, and pretty much everyone understands what the law is on these categories, it's going to be on how you actually discuss the facts in accordance with the law to get a good grade on this one. And really picking up on the detail of what's going on. Exploded in anger, shouted, he would kill him. I'm going to kill you. Intent to kill. I'm going to kill you. I'm just putting that up there. Okay. I'm going to kill you. And struck Vic with his fist, knocking Vic down. Well, it's just a fist fight. Not a big deal. people have these all the time, and not often does somebody die. That actually plays a part in whether or not there was an intent to kill, intent to cause great bodily injury, what kind of actions did he do. As Vic fell, he hit his head on the tile floor, suffered a skull fracture, and died. While that's foreseeable, is that likely to happen? I mean, is that going to rise to the level of murder? Which is ironic. They ask you about first degree, second degree murder, and voluntary manslaughter, when if you actually think about it, what is Dan going to be convicted of? The answer is involuntary manslaughter for misdemeanor manslaughter. And it's malum in se, a battery, that a foreseeable result is somebody dies. So it's actually going to be none of these. And involuntary manslaughter, the one thing they don't ask about is the one thing he's guilty of, which I find quite interesting. So the examiners give you this on purpose because they don't actually give you what he is guilty of. All right, so call number one, the first paragraph goes specifically to the murder stuff. The last paragraph goes to insanity. And oftentimes the examiners will do that. They'll break up each paragraph, and as you go through more and more of these essays, you will see that the examiners really do lay it out pretty well for you. Dan was charged with murder. So now his Sixth Amendment right to counsel and all Sixth Amendment rights have applied because formal charges have been filed. He pled not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity. At the jury trial, Dan took the stand and testified that he had been provoked. Adequate provocation, that's what voluntary manslaughter is. It's adequate provocation. Provoked. That he had been provoked to violence by Vic's crude remarks and could not stop himself from striking. He could not stop himself. We'll see how this will all go together from striking Vic. Several witnesses, including a psychiatrist, and generally to prove insanity. Don't forget, the burden of proving insanity is on the defense, generally by a preponderance of the evidence. And there's even 4 states that have eliminated the insanity defense altogether. Keep that in perspective. Testified about Dan's history of mental illness and his continued erratic behavior despite treatment. All right, history of mental illness, continued erratic behavior, got it. Can the jury find Dan guilty of first-degree murder? All right, the first thing is, before we get into the degrees of murder, what is murder? Think about that. So I'm going to make this a 2-step process. First of all, what is murder? Murder is the unlawful killing with malice aforethought. That's all it is. Unlawful killing with malice aforethought. Don't forget, with criminal law, in order to convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt, the prosecution has to prove act plus intent. Okay? The unlawful killing is the act. The killing someone is the act. All right, so your actions, your voluntary actions have killed somebody. Punching someone has actually killed somebody. Now, they have to show the act plus the intent. That's why murder is the unlawful killing with malice aforethought. Malice aforethought is the intent. This is the intent, and the unlawful killing is the act. So, malice aforethought, the intent for murder, is the only crime that has 4 different types of intents. There's 2 different types of intent for arson, maliciously or recklessly. You can act either maliciously or recklessly. For larceny is specific intent to deprive. Burglary is the intent to commit a felony upon entry. So there's the different intents for different crimes. Malice aforethought, so intent can be found by the intent to kill, the intent to cause great bodily injury, depraved heart, and finally, felony murder rule. All right, so that's the intent for malice aforethought. So that's murder. Murder is the unlawful killing without malice aforethought, and the malice aforethought, which is the intent for murder, can be any one of these intents. Now, how do you get to first-degree murder? In order to get to first-degree murder, you must have the specific intent to kill, and you must act with premeditation and deliberation. All right? You're not going to have the specific intent to kill with great bodily injury because you actually didn't even intend to kill someone. That's why it's called what's called implied malice murder. You didn't have the intent to kill with depraved heart because that's an extremely reckless act. There's no intent to kill. So with intent to kill, you have to have the specific intent to kill. So this is the only type of malice aforethought that's going to be used for first-degree murder. So it's the intent to kill with premeditation and deliberation. Now, some jurisdictions define felony murder as first degree, some define it as second degree. And you're sitting there going, well, how am I supposed to know what to do on the test? Well, on the MBE, they have to give you a statute. That's what makes the MBEs so much easier in a sense, because it's objective and they have to tell you what first degree murder is, so they're going to have to give you a statute to explain first degree and second degree. Now, in the essays in California, they're not going to do that. So you're going to say first degree murder, okay, this is murder, unlawful killing with malice aforethought. And that can be any one of these intents. But in order to get to first degree, you have to act with premeditation and deliberation. All right? So if you act with if intent to cause great bodily injury, second degree. Depraved heart, second degree. Felony murder, first or second degree, depending on the jurisdiction. Again, that could go either way. Now, it's interesting because first degree murder and voluntary manslaughter are kind of the opposite of each other, because it's the intent to kill, and it either goes up to first or it goes down to voluntary manslaughter, because voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing. That means you intended to kill the person. This is not an intentional killing, this is not an intentional killing, and this is an accidental killing. So, voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing, first degree murder is also an intentional killing. So, it's like, look at it like this. This was one of the ways it was explained to me that was really, really easy. Think about all murder as second degree murder. And you either take the elevator up to first degree with premeditation and deliberation, or you take the elevator down to voluntary manslaughter, which means you acted under a heat of passion. So, which way is the elevator going? Up to first degree or down? And that's going to be with the intent to kill. I really hope that made a lot of sense, because murder, and I'm just explaining the difference between malice aforethought and the degrees. Malice aforethought is just the intent, but it can only be this intent that can be used for first degree murder. The intent to kill, specific intent to kill, could have to be done with premeditation and deliberation. That means the elevator is going up. And voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing. Don't forget, involuntary manslaughter is an unintentional killing. So, because the examiners are only asking about 4 things, and this is really a repeat of the 2, they're only asking 3 things. Let's take each one of these elements and go. First of all, with first degree murder, did Dan act with premeditation and deliberation? Did he reflect on his killing or his actions in a calm and cool manner? Think about this. The person that plans a murder, like, oh, I'm going to kill that person, I'm going to poison them, I'm going to kill my boss, or an ex-lover, or your ex-husband's new wife. These are where murders commonly happen, people that know each other. Or I'm going to kill my uncle because I'm a beneficiary of the will. That is premeditation and deliberation. Let's take a look at it here. Did he act with premeditation and deliberation? At no time did he actually think about killing Vic in a calm and cool manner. Now, in one case, he did say, I'm going to kill you. But does that really show premeditation and deliberation? The answer to that can kind of go either way. I don't think so, because it's not calm and cool and calculated. It was all kind of part of the same act. And if you do say that he intended to kill him, you may be able to get voluntary manslaughter. So it's premeditation and deliberation. This would not be a case for first degree murder. It's not where someone plotted to poison someone or to kill an ex-lover. Those would, or to kill somebody for inheritance. Those would be specific incidents or examples of when there is premeditation and deliberation. Here, I think you're going to have a hard time finding it. So there's likely not going to be any first degree murder. All right? Second degree murder. Again, was there an intent to kill without premeditation and deliberation? He didn't really intend to kill him. Guy calls him crazy. He punches the guy. Nothing shows that he really went out of his way to think about or wanted to kill him. So probably no intent to kill. Besides, you just talked about intent to kill. Intent to cause great bodily injury. Well, in order to think about that, do we know how big Dan is? Or what the victim's size is? And I'll tell you why that matters. Because let's say you have Mike Tyson hitting an 80-year-old woman in the street. All right? By Mike Tyson punching her, somebody of that size and strength, and you could possibly, because of that disparity in weight and size, it's likely that his punch could and would kill her. Therefore, you might be able to find intent to cause great bodily injury. And Mike Tyson punching out an old lady would clearly be intent to cause great bodily injury. And if you don't know who Mike Tyson is, any strong heavyweight boxer, anybody who's like generous proportions, you can imagine a real big guy and a real small victim. That would be intent to cause great bodily injury. And even though Mike Tyson didn't intend to kill her, the fact that he hit her and she died, and that he was of such great bigger size and strength that you could prove murder, the malice of forethought, by the intent to cause great bodily harm. Depraved heart. Was his action so reckless that he was subjectively aware of the risks and devoid and lacks all social utility? I mean, this is just a street fight where he punched a guy one time. It's not like he stomped on his head or started kicking him when he was on the ground. That would be great bodily injury as well. Depraved heart, it's unlikely you're going to be able to show that. It's more, he punched the guy. One time, that was it. This is not a situation where we're going to have depraved heart. Depraved heart would be firing a gun in a crowded room or driving 85 miles an hour in a 15-mile-an-hour zone. That's depraved heart. This is not an example of an extremely reckless act. And felony murder rule, no crime being committed whatsoever. So it wouldn't be felony murder. And like, I don't care if you're talking about felony murder here or whatever you want to do. In fact, these two kind of blend together in a sense. Again, first-degree murder is premeditated. Second-degree murder is any murder. It's malice of forethought. It's an unlawful killing with malice of forethought. And then you're going to have the elevator up or the elevator down. So essentially, second-degree murder is what you focus on. And did you act with premeditation, deliberation, or did you act under a heat of passion? You go up or down with this one. That's pretty much it. Okay, again, with second-degree murder, we just went through that. Voluntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter really only has two elements. And although I know it's got four elements, I'm going to explain to you in 2 words how you can easily make a definition for voluntary manslaughter. Here are the 2 words: hot and cold. That's it. That's the definition. And it's got a subjective and an objective component. And the subjective component will always be satisfied. Was the defendant heated? Was the defendant heated? Would an average person, would a reasonable person be heated? Did the defendant cool down? Would a reasonable person cool down? That's all voluntary manslaughter is, hot and cold. So, did Dan act under heated passion? Was he heated? Yeah, he was heated. He was mad. He exploded in anger. Did Dan have time to cool down? No, it happened suddenly. Would a reasonable person have time to cool down? No, it happened instantly. So the cold element, the time to cool down, there was no time to cool down, whether a reasonable person or Dan cooled down. Dan clearly, subjective component will clearly be satisfied. But is Dan a hothead, or would the average person react like this? I don't care how you come out on the issue. I mean, would a reasonable person strike somebody for calling them a name? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of people do tend to settle their differences with violence. Others choose not to be confrontational and walk away, or make a snide comment, or just continue to bully on social media. So that is a discussion that you can have, and there's no right answer to this. It's just have the discussion, look at it from both angles. Don't write to the conclusion. Write to the analysis. Explain both sides like I'm doing. I don't care what the answer is, and the examiners don't really care either, at least for this. Would a reasonable person have cooled down? The answer is, I don't know. When you don't know the answer, when the answer cannot be definitively answered yes or no, that's when you know there's a discussion of both sides. If I break into your house at night with the intent to commit a crime, there is no 2 sides of the argument. It's a burglary, period. I entered your house at night with the intent to commit a crime. There is no discussion of any 2 sides, because that's a definitive yes, it's guilty of burglary. Here, is he guilty of voluntary manslaughter? I don't know. Let the jury figure it out. That's not my job. My job's to discuss both sides and to see it from both sides, as any good lawyer would do. And finally, insanity. The last issue is, can he be found not guilty by reason of insanity? Okay, well, what are the tests for insanity? I'm going to make this real easy for you. It's often said that A person who's insane, their mind is gone. Their mind is missing in action. It's MIA. Insanity is M plus I equals A. How did I get that? All right, the M stands for McNaughton. I is the irresistible impulse. And A is the American Law Institute, the model penal. They're the ones who write the model penal code. So, McNaughton is the cognitive, it's the mental. It has to do with whether or not you know right from wrong. Irresistible impulse is your ability to control your actions. So, the name irresistible impulse, you have an impulse that's uncontrollable. It's an uncontrollable urge. Uncontrollable conduct. Okay? And McNaughton, which is the mental test, plus irresistible impulse equals the American Law Institute's test, which is done, the American Law Institute is the people who wrote the model penal code, and the model penal code is a combination of McNaughton irresistible impulse. So essentially, that gives you both tests. So M plus I equals A. Your mind is missing in action. That's how easy insanity is. And I know someone's in the background going, what about the Durham test? You didn't discuss Durham. Okay, wise guy. Durham is in New Hampshire. You're not taking the bar in New Hampshire. When you have me teach you for New Hampshire, I will teach you the product test, the but-for test of the Durham rule. The Durham rule is only, the Durham rule for insanity is used in one jurisdiction, New Hampshire. If you don't know what the product test is, or the but-for test, or the mental disease causing the whatever, just write on the exam. I'd be really snide with the examiners. Hey, I'm not taking the bar in New Hampshire. I don't need to know the Durham test. I would literally write that. I guarantee a grader would love that, because I personally would. So I'm not going to go into the Durham test because only one jurisdiction uses it. And unless you try to move to the Northeast, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Okay, did Dan know right from wrong? Well, he got up to the stand and he testified that he could not stop himself from striking Vic. He did it in response to what Vic said, so clearly he knew what he was doing was right from wrong. All right? In fact, he was so cognizant of it and so mentally aware of it that he had to take action. Oh, I'm going to get this guy. Boom, punched him, knocked him out. So McNaughton was knowing right from wrong. He clearly knew right from wrong. He's not going to be able to use the McNaughton defense. And don't forget, McNaughton is used in the majority of jurisdiction and in California. California uses McNaughton. New Hampshire uses Durham. All right, irresistible impulse. You can't control yourself. And here it says he testified that he could not stop himself from striking Vic. Therefore, he might be able to use irresistible impulse. Well, if he's able to use irresistible impulse, then he's certainly able to use the American Law Institute's model penal code test, because that's a combination of both McNaughton and irresistible impulse. So if he was able to use either one of these two, he's definitely able to use the third one. So you don't even need to go into a discussion of model penal code by just saying, because it's a combination of those two, if he's going to be found not guilty under either one of those tests, he's not going to be guilty under the model penal code's test for insanity. And there you go. That's a wrap. I mean, that's all you need to know for this. This one does a great job of going over murder and insanity. So again, with first degree murder, there's no premeditation and deliberation. You do not act in a calm, cool, and calculated manner. For second degree murder, he didn't really have the intent to kill or the intent to cause great bodily injury, at least from these facts. We're not going to be able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. His act was not extremely reckless. No felony was being committed. Voluntary manslaughter, he exploded in anger, so the subjective component is satisfied. Whether or not a reasonable person would have responded like this, and whether or not it was actually an intentional killing, is the discussion that goes on in 3. And for number 4, insanity, definitely not going to be able to use McNaughton. Should be able to use irresistible impulse, and by default, he'll be able to use the model penal codes test. And there you go. That's a wrap from 2007 February, question 3 for criminal law. Thanks for listening.